called my uncle, who was an RCMP officer. He was in the process of retiring. He actually presented Dave with his badge at Depot when he graduated.
Wow.
And he was in Medicine Hat, so he was the one that I called because I knew he would know what to do. He was an officer, he would know what to do. So from there, I gathered my things and got in the car, and that was the longest drive to the Royal Alexander Hospital that I think I've ever had in my life. It just seemed, it was in the middle of the night, but it seemed to take forever to get there. Just forever. It's almost like time was standing still, and I wanted it to move quicker,
Right.
and it didn't.
You just wanted to get to his
I just wanted to get
bedside,
to him.
right? Was he in the room? Where was he when you got there?
Well, before I got there, I was told that he was going to surgery, and which kind of gave me a little bit of hope. I thought, okay, well, this is good. If he's going to surgery, this is good. I remember we pulled into close to the ambulance bays of the Royal Alex Hospital, and I remember walking in through the ambulance bay, walking through those doors, and just seeing all the officers and all the paramedics just standing there, and just the somber looks on their face, and it was just so so surreal. And I was quickly moved into a room off to the right where there were doctors waiting for me and some nurses. And I was no longer sitting down when I asked, I said, so is he in surgery? And they said, no, unfortunately, after we did the CT scan, they said, there's nothing we can do. And I was like, what do you mean there's nothing you can do? I said, there's nothing we can do. There's no way to save him. Within seconds of being told that my husband was not going to make it, my children were walking through the door. So I really didn't even have time to absorb what had really happened. And, my children sat down, and this is a moment that I will always remember, that'll always haunt me, is having to tell my children that their dad wasn't going to make it. And then just to hear their screams like that, the screams coming from them was the hardest and most heartbreaking thing I've ever had to hear in my life. And I don't think any type of therapy or any length of time will ever take that moment out of my head and out of my heart, because they were just told that their father wasn't going to live. And the hard part about that situation was that it's funny how everybody scrambled out of the room after they had brought the kids in. And so at that moment, it kind of hit me. I was like, I was just left here with 3 children after I had barely found out myself that my husband wasn't going to live, to tell them this, and I was left alone. So it was then, and right at that moment, that I knew, okay, Shelly, this is on you. You need to get it together, and you need to be as strong as you can be, because you're on your own right now. This is all going to be on you, and you need to get your shit together, and you need to make sure that those kids are taken care of, and all the ducks are in a row, and you've got to be in control, and you've got to just hold it together to get through this. And it was a huge eye-opener for me. And it was at that moment, I think, where I kind of switched into realizing that I had to put my feelings aside, which I should have never had to do.
Yeah.
And I had to start worrying about everyone else and everything else in the whole situation, and make sure that it was handled in a proper way.
And we're going to dig into that a little bit later in our conversation. I want to ask you, did you have a chance to be at his bedside and to say goodbye?
I did. A lot of people don't realize that, Dave lived for 4 days after that. Immediately after talking to my children, I was thankful that I did have his friend Rob there, who stayed with the kids and was he was trying to process this himself.
Yeah.
This was his best friend. This was his fishing partner. He and Dave took my children fishing every year. Like, they went on fishing trips together, and it was like those were his kids as well. They did everything together. And I asked to see Dave immediately, and he was just around the corner in one of the trauma rooms. And the doctors weren't in the room at that time, and it was the inspector, and he's like, yes, Dave's just around the corner. He said, you can go into the room. And I wasn't prepared to see what I saw. The very top of his head was bandaged, and I later found out why. But where he had been shot and his head was not bandaged. And so I was exposed to seeing my husband laying there with a bullet hole in his head. His face was very swollen, his eyes were filled with blood, and he was having uncontrollable seizures. And being part of the medical world, it's almost like I snapped, and it was just like, okay, he's having that type of seizure because this is what's happened to his brain. And at that moment I knew there was no coming back. The damage that was done to his brain was done. It was nothing that could be done at that moment. And the horrible part of that was that my children wanted to see him as well, and without my permission, the RCMP brought them in behind me. So I quickly had to pull them out of the room, and they did get to see some of what was happening, but I quickly managed to get them out of the room and to be taken care of and not have to see what I just saw. And quite honestly, nobody should have to see any of that. It's funny that night, when I finally was able to pull myself away from him and leave that room because they were getting ready to prepare him to move up to ICU, I remember leaving that room and turning and seeing this man dressed in a uniform who I thought was an officer, but I couldn't understand why I didn't know him because, well, why would I not know if he works with Dave? How do I not know him? And him looking at me and saying, I'm sorry, I did everything I could. I'm so sorry that we couldn't save him. And I, not knowing who he was and until just recently. And that person was always in the back of my mind, but I'll come back to that later because it's an amazing story to tell you who that person actually was.
So we will circle back on that. You said Dave lived for 4 days.
4 days.
So you had an opportunity to be by his bedside and say goodbye.
Mm-hmm. From there, he went to ICU at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. And I don't even know how to thank those people who work in that unit because I have never felt such calmness, such caring, such compassion from complete strangers that didn't even know me, didn't even know Dave. They were very informative all along the way. Any little thing that they were going to do to Dave, they were so gentle with talking to us and telling us everything that they were going to do. The staff was just unbelievable. They were just angels in disguise, I think, doing their job and taking care of him no matter what was going to happen, knowing that he wasn't going to live. They were still going to treat him as if he was going to live. And it was so comforting. And so,
but what about you, Shelly?
It was hard. I threw myself automatically into to worrying about the family, worrying about the kids. All of our family are from the East Coast, so we had to get them there. All of Dave's sisters and his mother and my parents and my brothers, and that was what was in my head.
Yeah.
I think at that point I had come to terms with, okay, Dave's not going to make it. have to understand that. And I knew it from, I was looking at it, I guess, from a medical standpoint, but
Because your background is what?
well, it started, that's actually how Dave and I met, was, teaching with the Red Cross, first responder, first aid, CPR, and now I work in ophthalmology. But just having that background of knowing the injury,
Yes.
knowing the way his body was seizing, knowing where he was hit in the brain, I knew.
He was your high school sweetheart.
He was pretty much my high school. Yeah, I was out of high school. We were introduced to each other by my best friend, who Dave was a paramedic for 13 years before he became an officer, and he did a lot of scuba diving. And my best friend Cheryl is a marine biologist, and they scuba dive together. So I remember one day her coming home and saying, "You have to meet this guy. You just have to meet him."
Mm-hmm.
And we finally met, and within 6 months of meeting each other, we were engaged, and in a year we were married and then having our children. So he was just my soulmate. He was it.
What was it like being married to an RCMP officer?
It was scary. Going into it, I thought I was going to be okay. I thought I've got this. He was a paramedic for 13 years. I knew what it was like for him to live that life, to be out there, in those situations, doing night shifts, being gone for long hours at a time, and being out in bad weather. Things kind of changed when I realized that he's on the other side of things. He's not the person helping,
Yeah.
He's trying to prevent these things. And I guess I never really understood until we were here and he was actively involved, and he would come home and talk, not specific details, but, talk about situations, and it just kind of made me think, oh my goodness. And things really got real for both of us after the Moncton shooting in June of 2014. And it was specifically that moment. We sat and watched the service together. We cried together. And it became real. It was so real that this could be Dave. So that prompted us to make the decisions that we needed to make. Talk about, okay, well, what if anything ever does happen with you in the line of duty? What is it you want?